Have you ever felt so hollow, so stripped of everything, that even the rain felt like the only thing left that could touch you? For Seris Virelle, a forgotten Omega, that feeling wasn't imagination, it was her life. Shivering, bruised, and cast out by the only pack she'd ever called family, she stumbled into a storm that mirrored the one raging inside her chest. She thought it was the end until something ancient stirred in the darkness. Out of the trees came a presence that seemed to bend the night around him, a raw force that smelled of pine smoke and lightning. The very air stilled as if afraid to breathe. He was Vaelen Thornecrest, the Alpha King, a name spoken only in whispers by those who knew fear. And when he saw her kneeling in the mud, tears mixing with rain, he spoke 5 words that shattered the course of her destiny. From now on, you're mine. The storm drenched the lands of the Silver Moon Pack like a shroud of cold iron. It wasn't the kind of rain that washed pain away. It was the kind that drove it deeper into the bone. For Seris Virelle, that sound had become the anthem of her life. She was an Omega, the lowest rung on the ladder of a world built on dominance and bloodlines. Her wolf was a whisper, a trembling silver flicker, hiding in the back of her mind. Tonight, that fragile spirit had finally broken. Alpha Draven Morvalk, a brute wrapped in power and cruelty, had thrown a feast to celebrate himself. His venomous mate, Nysa Calith, always wore a smirk that cut deeper than a blade. When a servant tripped beside Seris, a pot of boiling stew missed Nyssa and splashed across Seris's arm. The gasp that escaped her lips was her first mistake. Her second mistake was the tear that followed. Look at her, Nyssa had hissed, her voice echoing through the great hall. The pathetic little Omega, crying for attention over a spill. Draven's laugh had been a thunderous, ugly thing. She needs to learn her place. The backhand came next, not strong enough to kill her, but cruel enough to send her flying into the mud beyond the open doors. The pack's laughter had followed her like knives. "Get out of my sight, vermin," Draven roared. "Don't come back until you remember you're nothing but what we let you be." So she ran. Through the rain and darkness, her tattered dress clinging to her skin, the burn on her arm screaming in agony. The forest, usually a place of dread, for any lone Omega, felt like mercy compared to the cruelty of the hall. The rain blurred her tears as she stumbled over roots and stones. Lungs burning, heart collapsing under the weight of hopelessness. By the time she reached a forgotten clearing, her strength was gone. She curled beneath an ancient oak, its great limbs trembling under the downpour. Her body shuddered, silent sobs racking her frame. She grieved for the parents she barely remembered, for the life she'd never had, and for the hope that had finally died. Thunder rolled like mourning drums. The cold crept into her bones, numbing her fingers, her thoughts. So this is how it ends, she thought, a whisper drowned by the storm. Then something shifted. A scent sliced through the rain, sharp ozone after lightning pine, so ancient it carried the weight of centuries. The air itself grew heavy, thick with raw power. A shadow moved from the tree line, and the storm seemed to hold its breath. He stepped forward, massive, silent, predatory. Even soaked through his dark hair, absorbed the light instead of reflecting it. Seris's pulse pounded against her ribs, her inner wolf cowering in terror. This wasn't just an alpha. This was something beyond alpha. He stopped a few feet from her, still as carved stone, his gaze cutting through the gloom like gold fire in the storm. He didn't speak. He simply looked, as if he saw every fracture in her soul, every wound she'd ever tried to hide. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for death, expecting the killing blow of a rogue or territorial king. Death would have been a mercy. But instead the leaves rustled, and suddenly he was kneeling before her. The heat of his body radiated against her frozen skin. His hand reached out. She flinched on instinct. The hand halted midair. A low growl vibrated from his chest, not at her, but at the unseen ghosts who had broken her this way. Then slowly, deliberately, his fingers brushed a strand of wet hair from her cheek. His touch was impossibly gentle, reverent even, the scent of storm and strength enveloped her, dizzying and intoxicating. And then she saw his eyes, molten gold, fierce, ancient, alive, with the power of 1,000 tempests. Vaelen Thornecrest, the Alpha King of all North American territories. A legend made flesh. A creature both feared and obeyed. His jaw clenched at the sight of her bruises, the angry burn on her arm. The golden fire in his gaze deepened until it was almost painful to meet. He looked at her, this shattered girl, crying in the heart of his storm, and spoke in a voice that rumbled like thunder itself. "It's not a choice," he murmured, low and absolute. "From now on, you're mine." The words didn't soothe her. They branded her, claimed her. Seris's mind spiraled, unable to comprehend what was happening, traded from one monster to another, each more terrifying than the last. But before she could think, before she could even breathe, King Vaelen scooped her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. The world blurred. Rain shadows, thunder, all dissolving into the solid warmth of the man who carried her like she was something worth saving. The world spun in a blur of rain and shadow. Seris Virelle was pressed against a chest as unyielding as stone, a wall of heat and solid muscle that shielded her from the storm, yet radiated a whole new kind of fear. She braced for roughness, for careless grip, for the treatment she'd grown used to. But his hold was firm and deliberate, careful not to aggravate her wounds. He moved through the forest like the storm itself bowed before him. Where roots once tangled and branches scraped, they now gave way in silence. He didn't run. He glided soundless, focused, unstoppable. Seris buried her face in his shoulder. She had no strength left to resist, only instinct. And that instinct told her to stay still. The scent of him was everywhere, pine after thunder, the sharp snap of ozone, and something dark, earthy, male. It should have been overwhelming. But something inside her, the long dormant, beaten down Omega, recognized it and clung to it. When they broke from the tree line, the sight stole her breath. Parked on a moss-covered trail was a vehicle that looked more beast than car, all matte black armor, gleaming and dangerous. A man waited beside it, holding a large umbrella over the open rear door. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his expression carved in stone, a scar slicing through one eyebrow. Power radiated from him. A beta, but one of terrifying stature. "Your Majesty?" The man rumbled, eyes flickering to Seris, with a spark of surprise, quickly swallowed by neutral calm. "Everything is secure." "Cairn," Vaelen Thornecrest acknowledged with a voice like distant thunder. He stepped into the back seat with Seris still in his arms, settling her in his lap like she was something fragile, something he didn't intend to break. The door shut behind them with a final heavy thud. The storm vanished outside, muffled into silence by layers of leather and steel. Cairn Hollomere took the wheel and the vehicle glided forward, smooth and predatory. Inside it was warm. Vaelen hadn't released her. Every inch of Seris's awareness burned with the points of contact, his arm firm around her back, his chest, a steady rise and fall beneath her cheek, the weight of his thigh beneath her. He was solid, enormous, a mountain that moved with lethal grace. She trembled, a fine tremor running from shoulder to heel, not just from cold, but from dread she couldn't swallow. "You're shaking," Vaelen said, not unkindly, though the command in his tone was unmistakable. He shifted, then peeled off his soaked leather jacket and draped it over her. The thing swallowed her whole, drenched in his scent, sharp, masculine, and primal. The warmth seeped in, instantly curling through her frozen limbs. "What's your name?" The words scraped from her throat, ragged and low. "Seris." He repeated it like a secret meant to be tasted. "Seris." He didn't ask for a surname, didn't ask what pack she came from. He either already knew or didn't care. She belonged to him now. He had said it, declared it like an ancient vow. The drive blurred. Seris drifted in and out, somewhere between terror and exhaustion. She was vaguely aware of tall iron gates, crested with a snarling wolf's head, creaking open before them. A winding road through deeper, older forest than any she'd ever known. And then the fortress. Not a mansion, not a castle. This place had the soul of a mountain and the blood of warriors. Dark stone rose into the clouds' glass, glinting like ice built right into the cliffs. Cold, remote, unshakable, the stronghold of the Blackwood Dominion. Cairn opened the door. Vaelen stepped out with Seris in his arms, carrying her into a colossus of shadow and fire. The entrance hall stretched to the sky, its ceiling swallowed in gloom. The marble floor reflected the blaze of a hearth large enough to roast a bear. Guards in black stood like statues, their gazes forward, their faces unreadable, not flinching even as their king strode past with a dripping, wounded waif in his arms. The corridors felt more like sanctuaries than hallways towering reverent silent. Finally, Vaelen brought her into a suite of rooms and set her gently on her feet. Seris blinked in awe. The room was enormous, larger than the quarters she once shared with 3 other Omegas. A grand bed of carved blackwood and creamy linen. A stone fireplace flickering warm light. Glass doors opened to a balcony overlooking a valley lashed in storm. Then came a soft knock, and a woman entered. She had golden eyes like Vaelen's, but her face was kinder, sharper in wit, framed by thick auburn waves. The scent of alpha clung to her, but it was tempered, intelligent, not dominant. "Brother," she said, her eyes falling instantly on Seris. Worry flickered across her brow. "Cairn said you found a guest." "This is Seris," Vaelen said, his voice curt. "She's cold and hurt. See to her. Get her clean clothes. Call the medics." He spoke like she wasn't in the room, like she was something newly acquired, not a person, but a possession. But the woman stepped closer, smiling warmly. "Hello, Seris. I'm Eris Drewin. You're safe now." Her voice was like balm on burned skin. Seris wanted to reply, but the words wouldn't come. She just stared, dazed, wide-eyed, at the king who had dragged her out of the storm. Vaelen met her gaze once more, his golden eyes soft but firm. "Rest," he said. "We'll speak in the morning." Then he turned and left, a wave of quiet power disappearing behind the heavy door. Eris let out a breath. "Well," she muttered under her breath, "that's never happened before." She turned her full attention back to Seris. "Let's get you out of those wet clothes and into a hot bath. You look like you just came through hell." Seris didn't respond, but she had. Every day of her life had been a war she was slowly losing. Now she was warm. Now she was dry. And she was standing inside a palace, but she didn't feel free, because the door had closed. And no matter how soft the bedding or how golden the firelight, this place still felt like a cage gilded in shadow. It was a particular kind of torment, one that bled slowly, quietly into the bones. Eris Drewin was Seris Virelle's only constant visitor. The Alpha King's sister came often, bringing books from the fortress's immense library, her golden eyes studying Seris with a mix of pity and analytical curiosity. "My brother's temper could crack a mountain," Eris said one afternoon, lowering herself gracefully into the chair across from Seris. "He's not a man known for mercy or random acts of kindness. If he brought you here into the heart of his domain, it's because he saw something in you." Seris's fingers tightened around her teacup. He saw a victim, something to own. Eris's expression softened, her tone thoughtful. "Perhaps. But for an alpha like Vaelen, protection and possession are 2 sides of the same coin. Power is the only language he's ever trusted." She leaned forward, her voice turning firm. "You are under his protection now. No one will touch you, not Draven Morvok, not anyone. This fortress is your sanctuary." At the mention of her former alpha, Seris flinched. "He'll come for me. Omegas belong to the pack. I'm pack property." "Not anymore," Eris said, her words cutting like a blade. "You're under the Alpha King's mark. Draven would have to be suicidal to try reclaiming you. But reassurance, could not calm the unease twisting through Seris's chest. She still felt like a pawn in a game she couldn't see, much less understand. Her suite was vast, a gilded cage disguised as comfort. Elegant rooms, a marble bath, a bed large enough to swallow her whole. Yet she never touched the door handle. It was unlocked, she knew that, but the invisible weight of Vaelen's claim was heavier than any iron bolt. One night, driven by restless silence, she slipped out. The corridors glowed faintly under dim sconces, their flames casting long, dancing shadows. Guards stood like carved obsidian, motionless, impassive. She wasn't trying to flee. There was nowhere to go. She simply followed the sound, the faint rise and fall of voices. It led her to a pair of massive oak doors left slightly ajar. Peering through the crack, she saw a council chamber. A long, polished table gleamed beneath the lanterns. At its head sat Vaelen Thornecrest, surrounded by his inner circle, Cairn Hollowmere heiress, and a dozen other high-ranking wolves. An unsanctioned claim on another Pax Omega, a broad-shouldered alpha growled. "It's a provocation, Vaelen. Draven Morvok is demanding her return under sacred pack law." Cairn's voice rumbled in reply. The girl was half dead. King's law of protection overrides any claim born of cruelty. "She's a nobody," snapped a cold female voice. It belonged to Velra Mournshade, the king's lead strategist, all sharp lines and calculating eyes. "Bringing her here makes you look weak, distracted. We have rogues massing at the eastern border and you're babysitting a stray." Ceris's heart clenched. A stray. A distraction. That's all she was. Then Vaelen spoke. His voice wasn't raised yet. It filled the room, steady, absolute. Draven Morvok broke something greater than law. He broke a soul under my sky, his tone sharpened, golden eyes burning with restrained fury. I felt her despair ripple through the bond of this land. "I will not permit that kind of rot in my territories, not from an alpha." He paused, gaze sweeping over his council. "And she is not a stray. She is an asset. Her status is not up for debate." A chill slid down Ceris's spine. An asset. Vaelen's next words froze her completely. "If Draven wants her, he can come here and claim her himself. I'll send him back to his pack in pieces." A pulse of dominance rolled through the chamber, so potent that even Velra bowed her head. The air trembled. Seris stumbled backward, heart pounding. He hadn't saved her out of mercy. He'd done it for a reason. Cold, calculated, strategic. She fled back to her room, the word asset echoing through her mind. Hours later, long after midnight, a knock jolted her awake. The door opened and Vaelen Thornecrest stood there, framed by dim lamplight. He stepped inside and the room seemed to shrink around his presence. "You're recovering," he said. Eyes scanning her, noting the fading bruises the healed burn. His voice was softer than she remembered, but no less commanding. Seris could only nod. He turned to the window, his reflection ghosted against the glass. "I could hear your heartbeat from my study, half a fortress away." He faced her again. "You're afraid of me." "You're the Alpha King," she whispered. It was the only truth that mattered. "I am," he agreed. "And you're an Omega who's only known pain from Alphas. But I'm not Draven." He took a step closer. "I told my council you were an asset. Do you know why?" She shook her head, every muscle tight. "When I found you, the storm was furious. But when I touched you, everything stopped. The thunder, the wind, the rage. There was stillness. My wolf felt it too." He moved nearer, his eyes glowing like molten metal. "Omegas like you are rare old bloodlines. You don't just submit. You temper. You bring balance." His fingers brushed her jawline, sparking fire under her skin. "An Alpha King rules through fear. But true control comes through calm. You quiet the chaos inside me." Seris stared up at him, stunned. Her whole life she'd been mocked for her gentleness, punished for her softness, and now he called it power. "I'm not your asset," she said, quietly, defiance flickering to life. I'm not a tool. A slow, dangerous smile curved his lips, though his eyes stayed unreadable. No, he murmured, his breath grazing her ear, deep and rough. You're not a tool, Seris. You're a treasure. And a treasure is something a king protects at all costs. But don't mistake protection for freedom. You're still mine. His words branded her worse than fire. After that night, Vaelen's visits became frequent. He came without warning, long after council meetings had ended. He never touched her, never demanded. He simply was. He would sit by the fire across from her, silent, massive, unmoving, the storm in him quieted in her presence. The lines of strain around his eyes softened. His breathing slowed, deepened. The fortress that bowed to his will seemed to rest when she was near. At first Seris trembled under his gaze, a rabbit watched by a wolf. But soon she saw what Eris had hinted at, that her calm soothed even his fury. The whispers came next. The fortress was full of ears. Velra Mournshade watched her like a hawk, resentment in every glance. Guards stayed respectful but distant, wary of the girl who had somehow tamed the storm, wearing a crown. And Seris, though clothed in silk and wrapped in warmth, knew this truth deep in her bones. She had traded one prison for another. Only the bars had turned to gold. Only Eris Draywin and Cairn Hollowmere treated her like she was more than a shadow. They're afraid of what they can't define, Eris said one afternoon, finding Seris Virelle tucked in the fortress's vast library. Among the rows of leather-bound volumes and dust-scented parchment, Seris had found her true escape. A place where the world felt still. They see an Omega holding the king's attention. Eris continued, folding her arms over her chest. And it upsets the entire balance they cling to. Seris traced her fingers over the edge of a weathered tome on ancient lycanthrope law. He says I calm him. Eris tilted her head. He's not just calm, she replied. He's focused. The Bloodfang rogues have haunted our borders for years. But in the last week, your presence here, he's made 2 flawless strikes against them. It's like you cut through the noise in his head and let him see. A strange warmth bloomed in Seris's chest, small, fragile. For the first time, someone implied she might be more than a burden. That maybe she was helping. But that quiet spark didn't last. A week later, a messenger from the Silver Moon Pack arrived. Vaelen Thornecrest granted the emissary an audience in the great hall, a cathedral of stone fire and echoing tension. From the gallery above, hidden in shadow, Seris watched beside Eris, her hands trembling. The emissary stepped forward, a lean, sharp-eyed beta, Zarek Durnfell. He stood before Vaelen's obsidian throne, spine straight, with false confidence. Alpha King Thorncrest, he announced. Alpha Draven. Morvok sends his respects. And a demand. By sacred law, the Omega Seris Virelle is property of the Silver Moon Pack. She fled. He demands her return. A growl rolled through the Blackwood warriors standing guard, but Vaelen simply raised a hand and silence swept through the hall like a blade. Pack property, Vaelen said softly, is expected to be protected, not beaten, burned, and left for dead. I found her half frozen on my land. That forfeits your claim under the Alpha Accords. Zarek's mouth twisted. A minor disciplinary matter. She's an Omega. She needs discipline, not coddling. A laugh sharp and cold echoed from the throne. Vaelen leaned forward, his gold eyes narrowing into pure threat. Concerned is he. The pressure in the room thickened. Even from the balcony, Seris's knees threatened to buckle. Tell Draven this, Vaelen growled. She is under my protection now. His claim is void. If he wants to challenge me, he can come here himself. I'll send what's left of him back in pieces. Zarek hesitated, but stayed rooted. Draven predicted your defiance. He's already petitioned the regional council. They've agreed to arbitration 3 days from now, neutral ground. If you don't show, you'll be judged as a tyrant, ignoring the laws you swore to uphold. Vaelen's jaw tensed, the corded muscles flexing beneath his skin. He was being cornered, not through strength, but with law. Fine, he snapped. Tell them I'll be there, and I'll bring the Omega. Let the council see their precious disciplinary matter with their own eyes. Zarek bowed stiffly and left the doors closing with a final boom behind him. From above, Eris hissed under her breath. It's a trap, Vaelen. Vaelen looked up, locking eyes with Seris through the shadows. His face was hard. I know, he said, then stood tall, imposing final. But it's a trap I must step into. To refuse is to show fear. We'll go. That night he came to her room. The calm he usually carried with him had been replaced by something sharper. Restless. Hunting. Are you scared? He asked, voice low, rough. Seris nodded. Yes. I don't want to see him again. He crossed the room in 2 strides, stopping before her like a wall of heat and storm. His hands cupped her face, warm and commanding. He won't touch you, he said, eyes blazing. He won't speak to you. He won't even look at you, or I'll rip his throat out in front of the entire council. His voice wasn't a threat. It was an oath, raw and brutal. You are not his, he whispered. You are mine to protect. And in that moment, with her heart caught between his fury and her fear, Seris realized something more terrifying than any war. She wasn't just afraid of Draven. She was afraid of how that word mine no longer felt like chains. It sounded like safety. And that was far more dangerous. The arbitration was to take place on sacred ground, a place called Titan's Henge, an ancient stone circle carved into a wind-beaten plateau where laws were older than blood and no lie dared linger. Vaelen arrived with his chosen elite, Cairn Hollowmere Velra Mournshade, and a small retinue of warriors, sharp as blades. Seris rode beside him in the same armored transport. He had insisted. She wore a deep blue dress chosen by Eris, simple, elegant, and long-sleeved, hiding what little remained of the burn on her arm. Her pale hair was braided, her posture straight. She looked composed, but inside she was unraveling. Vaelen said nothing, but at one point, as her breath hitched with rising dread, his hand closed gently over hers. It was grounding, warm, a silent shield against the cold flood of fear. When they arrived, the plateau was already thick with wolves. Alphas from every territory formed a half-circle around the stones, their combined aura turning the air into something heavy and electric. And at the center of it all, grinning like he already believed he'd won, stood Draven Morvok. Nissa Kaleth stood at his side, her expression smug, her eyes dripping with venom. When Draven's gaze landed on Seris, his smile curled in possessive triumph. Seris flinched. She couldn't stop it. Beside her, Vaelen's hands squeezed tighter, his knuckles white. A low, bone-deep growl rumbled in his chest, so deep it made the ground shiver. An elder stepped forward, white-furred, ancient, cloaked in authority. Alaric Greythorn, head of the regional council. Alpha King Vaelen, Alpha Draven, he called. We gathered to settle this matter under the old laws. Draven, state your claim. Draven straightened, puffing his chest like a beast ready to bellow. The Omega Seris Virelle is of the Silver Moon Pack. She ran from her duties. King Vaelen has harbored her, violating sacred boundaries. She is pack property, and I demand her return. I demand her return for proper discipline and reassignment. Alaric Greythorn's weathered gaze turned to the Alpha King. Your response, Your Majesty. Vaelen Thornecrest's voice thundered across the plateau, each word sharpened by contempt. My response is this. Draven Morvok is a liar and a coward who builds his power by breaking the weak. When I found Seris Virelle, she was half dead. That is not discipline, that is desecration. He rose slowly from his throne of obsidian, casting a shadow long enough to stretch across the stones. The law of sanctuary, he continued, is older and holier than any doctrine of pack ownership. He turned slightly, his gaze burning into Seris. Step forward. The moment hit her like a thunderclap. All eyes turned. Her pulse pounded like a war drum in her chest. Vaelen released her hand not in rejection, but as a command. Drawing a shaky breath, Seris Virelle emerged from his side and into the sacred circle. The weight of every gaze threatened to crush her. She couldn't look at them, not yet. "Show them your arm," Vaelen said, his tone low but firm. Trembling, she pushed back her sleeve. Though Thalos Myron's healing salves had erased most of the damage, a faint silver scar still marked the pale skin, a ghost of agony past. A ripple of shock swept through the gathered alphas. Gasps. Sharp intakes of breath. They knew a burn when they saw one, and this had been no accident. From behind Draven, Nissa Calith scoffed aloud. "She's always been clumsy, useless. Probably spilled something on herself again." Vaelen took a step forward, but before he could speak, Seris lifted her head. She turned to Alaric Greythorn, then to the rest of the council. Her voice was quiet but unwavering, the wind catching each word like a sacred affairing. "It wasn't an accident," she said. "Draven struck me. Because I cried out in pain, he threw me into the storm like garbage. And it wasn't the first time. It was just the last." Her words were simple, honest, unpolished, and they cut deeper than any blade. The assembly murmured. Stony faces shifted with unease. Heads turned toward Draven with something colder than judgment disgust. His face twisted with fury. "She's a lying little snake. She's mine." He stepped forward, hand raised, and Vaelen moved. In a flash, the Alpha King became a blur of black fury standing between Seris and her tormentor, like a drawn sword. But before a single blow could be struck, something else happened. The air snapped. The collective aggression, the clashing energies of alphas on the brink of war, the suffocating tension, it collapsed into stillness. From Seris, a pulse of silver light rippled outward, gentle, radiant like moonlight distilled into breath. It wasn't an attack. It was peace. Growls faded from throats. Rage drained from golden eyes. Even Draven faltered mid-step, his face blank with confusion. The atmosphere changed. The very wind stopped to listen. The storm paused as if the world itself inhaled and forgot to exhale. Every wolf on the plateau, from the mightiest elder to the youngest guard, felt it. A calming, balancing force they had no words for. All eyes turned to Seris. She stood bathed in ethereal light, a silvery shimmer visible only to those with the blood of wolves. Even she looked stunned, as if unsure what she'd just done. Alaric stepped forward, reverence in every step. "By the moon goddess," he whispered, voice cracking. "A true Omega, a harmonizer." And just like that, the whispers began, not of law or property, but of legend. A harmonizer, a bloodline long thought extinct. An Omega whose gift wasn't submission, but balance. Not meant to kneel, but to temper the fury of alphas. A being who could silence armies, bring focus to chaos, still the beast inside even the most savage heart. Not a weakness, but the ultimate strength. And now they understood. Vaelen hadn't taken in a stray. He had discovered something sacred. The murmurs grew louder, reverent, and terrified all at once. The political landscape had just shifted beneath their feet. Draven staggered back, horror etched into every line of his face. He had her. He could have ruled the continent with her power. And he had tried to break her. He hadn't known. And now, he had lost her forever. Vaelen turned his gaze to Seris, golden eyes burning. The rage had vanished, replaced by something deeper, darker, and far more dangerous: possession. He stepped back into the center of the circle, his voice carrying like thunder. "This arbitration is over. She is not property. She is not claim. She is not prey. She is a treasure of our kind, and she is mine." He extended his hand to Seris. She looked at it and then at him. And for the first time, when she reached out, it wasn't with fear. It was with something that shimmered just beneath the surface: sovereignty. As their hands met, the broken remnants of the girl who'd been thrown into the storm began to fall away. and in their place stood the first flickers of something more. A queen. The ride back to the Blackwood Dominion was quiet, but no one was calm. Everything had changed at Titan's Henge. The moment Seris released that wave of harmonizing power, the myth had become real. She was no longer Vaelen's rescued stray. She was a seismic force in the world's balance of power. Even the guards looked at her differently now, with awe instead of wariness. Even Velra Mournshade's usual scorn had cooled into something calculating, cautious. When they returned, Vaelen escorted her back to her suite. But this time, he didn't leave. He shut the door behind them and turned to face her. The calm she'd imposed on the plateau had long faded. His energy was coiled tight now, intense, wild, barely leashed. "A true Omega," he said, his voice a low, stunned growl. "All this time and you didn't know." Seris folded her arms across her chest. "I thought I was just weak," she whispered. "They said my wolf was too quiet, that I was too sensitive." Vaelen shook his head, stepping closer. "It's not weakness. It's receptivity," he corrected. "You feel the emotions of the pack and you can shape them. What you did today, you stopped a bloodbath with a breath. You froze a battlefield." His golden eyes locked onto hers, blazing. "Do you understand what Draven would have done to you? If he knew. He wouldn't have just abused you, he would have tried to enslave you, break your mind, force you to serve as his weapon." The truth hit her like a slap. Every cruel year snapped into focus, no longer senseless. It had been a slow, unknowing attempt to crush her soul. Before she could speak, a hard knock shattered the tension. Cairn Hollowmere pushed through the door, face grim. "Your Majesty," he said without waiting for permission, "we've got a problem. A big one." "What is it?" Vaelen growled. "The eastern border, the Blood Fangs," Cairn said. "It wasn't just raiding. They've breached the perimeter." His jaw tightened. "It's a full-scale invasion, timed perfectly while we were distracted at the Henge. They knew when our defenses would be low. They had our patrol patterns, our numbers." Cairn looked Vaelen in the eye. "There's a traitor." The word sat in the silence like a spark waiting for flame. "There's more," Cairn Hollowmere said, lowering his voice. "We just got word from one of our scouts near the Silver Moon border. Draven Morvuk isn't heading back to his pack. He's on the move with his elite warriors, marching east, straight toward the Blood Fangs." The pieces slammed into place like a trap snapping shut. It was a setup, Eris Drawen said, appearing in the doorway, her face pale. "The arbitration. It wasn't about reclaiming Seris. It was about pulling you and your strongest fighters away from the fortress. A distraction." Vaelen's fists clenched, his knuckles cracking loud in the tense silence. "Draven's not smart enough to plan this. Someone's guiding him." Velra Mournshade entered, her voice grim. Ruvan Skeld, the Bloodfang Alpha, is savage and cunning, but this level of coordination? That's refined. This is something deeper. Seris's thoughts were spinning. Draven. The rogues, a traitor inside Blackwood, all connected. And somehow she was the thread tying it together. Her mind darted back to Silver Moon, the eyes that lingered too long, the whispers that stopped when she entered the room. Draven had always been arrogant and cruel, but clever, no. He was a puppet. So who was pulling the strings? A cold shiver slid down her spine. Nissa Calith. She was always at Draven's side, whispering into his ear, manipulating, poisoning, and her family. Her lineage had been disgraced and cast out by Vaelen's father for dark magic. Seris's voice came out in a breath. "Nissa!" Everyone turned to her. "It's her," Seris said, voice steadying with each word. "She's the one behind this." It was never a mating bond. There was no connection between them, only ambition. Velra's eyes narrowed. A blood sorceress. They hide their true intentions. They can mask emotion, spin illusion. If she's working with the rogues, she may have promised them territory power in return for helping Draven take your throne, with her pulling the strings behind him. The betrayal was staggering. Not just a rebellion, a coup. Years in the making. Then a sound cut through the room, deep bone-shaking, the alarm bell. Its toll echoed through stone and marrow. "They're here," Karen growled, drawing the twin blades he favored. "They're coming from both sides." The full army at the border in a small elite strike team aimed at the heart of the fortress. Vaelen changed. In an instant, the calm, composed king vanished, replaced by the storm. His golden eyes blazed like fire, his canines elongated. His presence exploded outward, like thunder rolling across the stone walls. Velra locked down protocol. "Eris, take command of the western flank. Cairn on me. We meet them at the gate." He turned to Seris, his voice a growl of fury and protection. "You stay here. This room is a panic chamber. Nothing gets in, no." The word left her lips before she even realized she'd spoken it. Vaelen stopped mid-step, stunned. She met his burning gaze, unflinching. "My entire life I've been hiding, cowering, letting others decide who I am." Her voice rose clear and fierce. "But what I did at the henge, if I can do that, I can help. They're fighting because of me. I won't stay locked away while your people die in my name." "It's too dangerous," he roared. "And letting your warriors fight clouded by rage is more dangerous." She snapped back, her voice a blade of steel. "I can anchor them. Bring focus. Let me stand with you, not as some treasure in a glass case, but as part of this pack, as your equal." Vaelen stared at her, not as the drenched, broken Omega he found in the forest, but as a force of nature. He saw what she was now, and more importantly, so did she. A slow, primal smile pulled across his face. "Then stay at my side," he said. "You are the eye of the storm, and I—" He stepped closer, his voice low and lethal. "I am the thunder and the lightning." He turned and strode out, and Seris Virelle, heart-pounding, followed, leaving behind her cage of silk and gold. She wasn't running anymore. She was charging into the fire. The main gate exploded into chaos. Steel clashed. Fangs bared. Blackwood warriors held the line with ruthless precision against the feral onslaught of Ruvonskeld's rogues. Above it all, Seris stood beside Vaelen on the ramparts, wind tearing at her hair, her senses stretching across the battlefield like a net. Below, Draven Morvok looked up, and when he saw her, he howled. A sound of madness, hatred, obsession. "Thornecrest," he screamed, "you stole my key to power hand her over, and I'll make your death swift." Valen's growl was low and lethal. "She was never yours." Then he leapt. No stairs, no hesitation. He launched from the wall and hit the earth like a meteor stone cracking beneath his boots. Mid-air, his body twisted reshaped shadows, splitting, and in a breath, the Alpha King was no longer a man, but a beast, a massive obsidian wolf with golden eyes and bone-splitting power, crashing into enemy ranks with a roar that made even stone tremble. His warriors surged behind him, howling as one. From above, Seris felt the collision of rage and bloodlust like a storm battering her mind. Fear tried to rise, but Valen's words whispered inside her. "You are the eye of the storm." She closed her eyes, reached inward, and released. But this time she didn't flood the battlefield. She shaped it. Her power poured into her pack, not soothing but sharpening, calm, precision, purpose. The warrior's fury turned cold, deadly. Every swing found its mark. Every step became rhythm. Then she turned her gaze on the rogues and twisted the blade. She didn't calm them. She amplified them. Their bloodlust surged out of control. Rage turned to paranoia. Precision became panic. They began turning on each other, snapping at shadows, tearing into comrades. The battlefield fractured. The tide turned. And in the heart of it, two alphas collided. Vaelen and Draven Wolf against Wolf Tooth and Claw. Raw fury made flesh. But Seris felt another battle ignite. A sharp, searing pain stabbed into her mind. Her eyes flew open, and there on a distant ridge, Nissa Calith. Hands raised, light pulsing sickly purple. Dark magic shimmered in the air, aimed straight at Seris. She had no time to react, Luna. The scream tore through the roar of war. Cairn Hollomere flew into her path blades, forgotten arms spread wide. The bolt struck him in the chest. He hit the stone hard, smoke rising from his wound, a twisted cry torn from his throat. Seeing Cairn Hollomere collapse for her, shattered the last pieces of Seris's fear. It didn't crack her. It hardened her. Something ancient and powerful rose in her like a tidal wave. Her gaze locked on Nissa Calith, and for the first time Seris didn't feel afraid of the sorceress. She pitied her. Digging deep into her well of power, Seris didn't strike with rage, she struck with truth. Pure, raw, unbearable. She sent a psychic blast of clarity straight into Nissa's mind, showing her the inevitable collapse of her schemes, the emptiness of her cruelty, and the cold void of her own soul. The weight of it crushed through the sorceress's mental defenses like glass. Nissa shrieked in agony, stumbling backward, her magic faltering into sparks. She vanished into the shadows, broken and fleeing. In that moment, the entire invasion lost its spine. Below, Draven Morvok stumbled as if the puppet strings inside him had just been cut. He looked around, confused, vulnerable. It was the only opening Vaelen Thornecrest needed. With a savage roar that split the night, the giant black wolf lunged. His fangs sank into Draven's throat, and with a final snap, the war ended. Silence rolled across the battlefield like a wave. The Alpha King shifted back into human form, bloodied, bruised, and radiating dominion. His golden eyes found Seris above. He walked toward her, every warrior bowing as he passed. But Seris didn't wait. She flew down the stairs, heart pounding, and dropped to her knees beside Cairn's motionless form. His chest was still. "No," she whispered, placing her hands on the charred wound. She didn't beg. She called. A soft silver glow lit her palms, her energy flowing into him, not just calming, but knitting, restoring. Her Omega gift surged like moonlight, pushing back the dark poison left by Nissa's spell. His breathing returned slow but steady. She looked up. Vaelen was there, but this time, he didn't look like a king. He looked like a man who had just witnessed something holy. He dropped to his knees before her, heedless of the mud and blood. In the rain, he said, voice raw and loud enough for all to hear, "I claimed you. I thought I was claiming a prize. But I was a fool trying to chain a force of nature." His golden eyes locked with hers. "What you did tonight was what queens are made of." He lifted her hand, pressing it to his lips. "I'm not asking you as a king now. I'm asking as a man. Be my mate. Be my Luna Queen. Rule beside me. Not because you are mine," he paused, eyes shining, "but because I am yours." Tears blurred her vision. Not tears of fear, tears of truth. "Yes," she whispered, voice steady and sure. "Yes, Vaelen." He pulled her into him and kissed her fierce, tender whole. And when he did, the bloodied Blackwood warriors threw their heads back and howled a sound of triumph, of loyalty, of home. That night, the girl who had once cried alone in the rain became a queen who stood in the storm. Seris Virelle's journey from cast-out Omega to revered Luna proved something the Pax would whisper about for generations. That the very thing others call weakness might just be the source of our greatest strength. Her bond with Vaelen Thornecrest wasn't about dominance and submission. It was balance. She was the calm. He was the storm. Together they weren't just lovers. they were destiny reborn. If Seris's transformation from broken to queen stirred something in you, if Vaelen's fierce devotion gripped your heart, don't forget to hit like. Share this epic with someone who needs to believe in their own strength, and subscribe to the channel for more tales of power, passion, and fate. This is just the beginning. The storm always returns, and with it, more legends to rise.